If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniac. One summer long ago, I worked for a house painting company made of many small franchises preying on college students for underpaid and overworked employees. Said interlude, servants workforce / generally returned to school in late August, and the franchise would close until next summer. Now I was a lackey who hired everyone, formed crews, met with customers, transported materials, etc. AKA my boss's job, but he preferred, not doing it. Late in the summer, my boss decided to continue into the 4 months so he could make more money while depriving me further against my will. So I had to hire people who are in the painting business, but for whatever reason couldn't find a job without going to a reputable company, and so had no option but working with us. Yay. Enter Jim. Jim was a veteran, about 45 years old, which was far above my usual 18 to 22 hiring demographic, but he had impressed me over the phone, as I was essentially painting an entire house for myself or without skeleton crew until I could scrounge up more workers. I didn't interview him in person, just told me to show up ready and go and meet me and a crew at a new job site at 9 AM Monday. Life as it does happens, and I had an emergency that prohibited me from being there on Monday. Some of my summer workers who didn't go off to school would be there, so I texted them explaining to help Jim to get used to the way we worked and make sure to keep it basic. If he was having trouble, send him home and we'd start over with someone there next day. At 9:45, my phone is blown up with text and calls. I'm awake now, but I slip outside to hiss into the phone. I say, I'm staring at a dead family member. You know this? Now what? Jim isn't okay. What do you mean? He's insane. He's ruining this person's roof and he won't listen to us. He keeps screaming at us to be quiet. Well, I thought Jim had a point with the last part since my crew spent more time talking than painting, but I digress. In their infinite wisdom, my crew stuck this dude with me on the roof to paint a teeny space which would take about 5 minutes with a brush, while the other guy gets a job and homeboy pulls out a 9-inch roller and goes to town, swooping the thing up and down like a skateboarder on a half pipe, so the entire black roof area below him is covered in beige paint. I tell him to get down and send him home. I'll deal with it after the wake. I tell my boss what's going on. He brushes it off, saying that Jim called to apologize and to tell him he could bring his cousin, Oscar, a guy who's apparently worked as a painter in a union, to the next job. Boss doesn't consult me, says it's fine to have a deal. Great. New job site, new day. I still hate my life. Oscar isn't in a union, but he did work as a painter for over a decade, until he was put in jail for armed robbery. A jail stint that he was fresh out of as of a week ago. To Oscar's credit, he was very polite, respectful, and different. I had actually spoken to him about his jail time and he was very open about it. I was convinced he'd done an excellent job working too. Now my boss stopped by now for the first time in forever and was also impressed by Oscar. So I'm impressed that he decided Oscar and Jim would take on a job by themselves. A job that was mostly trim work for my family of my mum, dad, and 3 daughters. He then also decided that he would take care of the customer interaction with the exception of me dropping off the extra tall ladder halfway through to reach one ridiculously small but very high piece. Sure, fine. Halfway through the job, I show up like a good person, with a massive ladder in tow. Jim is listening to music, and I see Oscar look at him, and then wave to me to keep driving and park around the corner. Now I do love some good old drama, and don't really care about anything anymore, so I do. Oscar sprints to my car to tell me that Jim has been making the owners and their daughters very uncomfortable, and my boss had been ignoring their calls. Oscar had told them privately to wait until the day I come, and he would make me talk to them. I thanked Oscar and told him I would deal with them when it's right. I say, can you hang around, just in case anything happens, and he says sure. So I pull into the driveway, nod at Jim and knock on the door. I was pulled in almost immediately by a frantic mother. The family was Russian, so I was treated to a delude of information that I could mostly understand, but the rest I couldn't make any sense of. Apparently Jim had been very opportunist about the ladder position, as he worked on the second floor of the house, apparently staring directly into the girls' bedrooms, which he took photos of on his phone. He also made multiple comments about the girls as they come home from school. Just weird stuff. Now I just about managed to keep myself from melting into the floor and promise them that this will be dealt with immediately. With that, I walk out to confront Jim. I ask if I can use his phone because mine's dead. After he hands it over, I find literally almost 100 pictures of various bedrooms from every possible angle, zoomed in and out, etc. He sees me open the pictures from the ladder and starts flying down, screaming at me. He launches at me and Oscar puts himself in between us, yelling at Jim to calm down. Jim panics and flees for his car, leaving his phone with me. Police were called and I handed the phone over, was interviewed. Poor Oscar almost had a panic attack, but they said they would work with the family and take it from there. Great job, I finished the job with Oscar. We get tipped, and the family thanked us for helping them, and they didn't really know how to handle what Jim was doing. Time passes and I'm watching TV in the living room. It's about 9 PM. Light floods the room as a car pulls into my neighbour's driveway with its brights on. I don't care, I'm watching TV. A few minutes pass and I hear yelling from the neighbour's house. I look out the window and it's Jim in the driveway, because my boss had given him my home address as where to pick up the checks at the end of each week. He got confrontational, yelling at his neighbours. When I go around, I can see that idiot staring at me through the window about 6 feet away. He then pulled out a handgun and starts mentioning some weird stuff at my wife. Before I can even register this is actually happening, or grab my own gun, which I would have heroically used to shoot myself in the foot or something. My living room is filled with red and blue lights as multiple police cars pull up and arrest Jim. Jim had 4 guns in the passenger seat of his car, one of which was an AR-15 and a shotgun. He apparently had only taken them out just by mistake and wasn't going to do anything to me. Absolutely crazy. I'm glad that the cops got there in time before anything happened to me or my family. This past Monday, my co-workers and I returned to our hotel from a day of work out in the field. Rebecca and I walked to our rooms as we stood outside of our rooms. I opened mine up and saw someone in the bathroom. I say hello. Nobody answered. My first instinct was that it's a cleaning lady in there for some reason. And then I saw my bag with my clothes in it in her hands. I said to my co-worker, "There's a woman in my room." Then I asked the woman, "What are you doing with my stuff?" It gets a little fuzzy here because I can't remember anything I said and what she said, but she kept mumbling about how her key still worked, how it still worked and how she got in. I was in shock, and she obviously was very flustered having been caught mid-robbery. She dropped my bags, fumbled around with her purse in a white plastic bag. By this time my co-worker was behind me watching all of this unfold. The woman began screaming and walking towards the door and said, "What's in the bag?" Thinking it's probably my stuff, and so she said, "No, just my things, I'll show you." And she did. I looked and didn't see anything of mine, so I'm in shock now. I let her leave. I went into my room, and it's been ransacked. I did a quick look around to see if anything had been taken. All my electronics are still there. Then I went to my bedroom and I saw my underwear, bikini, and other clothes shoved into my own bags randomly. Even my passport's in there. Then I looked around the counter and I saw that she got my medication. I'm not sure what was going through my head at that moment either, but I wanted it back, so I ran out the door to find her. I ran to the laundry room downstairs and out to the side of the hotel and didn't see her. I then realised that I'm never going to find her, so my co-worker and I went down to the lobby to tell them what happened and call the police. We went back up to my room to wait, and I noticed that there's a small metal bat on my bed, a little larger than one of the novelty ones you can get at a baseball game. But there's also a flashlight on the end. She must have been in a hurry. She also left behind a necklace that must have fallen out of her bag while scrambling with mine. I was almost freaking out at this point because I thought she'd gotten away with my medication that I needed. The police got there and took our statements and looked around the room as well. One thing that I noticed was that there were bits of drywall in the sink, and I pointed that out to the cops, but no one knew where it came from. We started locking the door and looking around it and the windows to see if she pried in, but there's nothing. So we kind of went by the idea that she had a spare key somehow, even though the hotel front desk was adamant that there's no way it could be. The officer came back, bringing 2 more officers as backup, because they thought that the woman might still be in the vicinity. But after our statements are taken, they say there's nothing else they can do, and left. I sat down to finally make some calls to people, and as I am on the phone, I start thinking about the drywall in the sink that makes no sense to me. I just can't understand it. Now, I start to put weird ideas together in my head. I got my co-worker and asked her to help me pull out this mirror on the wall. And we took the mirror down and realised there's a huge hole that someone desperate enough could squeeze through. I then asked Brian and Rebecca if I should call the police again to let them know what I found, and my boss said there's still cop cars in the parking lot. So I went down to tell them, and the female cop kind of rolled her eyes saying, "But it just can't be right," but the young guy said, "I'll come." They both came back up looking in the hole and found a pillow, blanket, cigarettes, clothes, even a toothbrush. So this woman had been living behind my mirror for God knows how long. She had access to my room whenever she wanted. One of the officers called the original officer to get them to come back. She explained to him what's going on, and over the radio I heard no way. He comes back and his mind is blown, as all of ours are. Obviously we packed up immediately. What's even crazier though is that she's probably been there for a very long time. The last time we stayed at this hotel, I would randomly smell cigarettes but assumed it is someone in the hallway, not a junkie hiding in my mirror. She had access to other rooms too. The holes in the room were renovated, and the hotel had to patch up the mirrors after. When I was around 10 or 11 this happened. I was home alone. The doorbell rang while I was watching TV, so I hastily moved my bowl of cereal and got up to answer the door. It was the mailman who had gotten a package, but it was so big that he needed help to carry it. Something about him felt off. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but a dirty white shirt and jeans. I asked him where his truck was because I don't see it parked out, and he said it's around the corner, to just follow him and grab the parcel. He kept on telling me that I needed to help him, but I politely said I wasn't feeling well, and that we would just go over to get our mail from the office. He said how much of a hassle that would be, and to just go out there and get it. I said I had to get my shorts on and my shoes and go upstairs, and he waits outside. I locked the door and bolted upstairs, closing all the windows. I call my mum to come home, explaining everything. The man's still outside and he shouts at me, asking if I've got my shoes on. I replied that my mum was coming because she's much stronger and can carry the package. Once I'd said that, he quickly ran and I never saw him again. When I was about 7 years old, my brother's about 10, it was well past our bedtime when our mum awoken us off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was just the three of us in the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of the hallway. Taking another left down that hallway led to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are window doors that we always kept locked and rarely used. The door to my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened up to our back porch. My brother and I both had a habit of waking up in the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom, saying, "I'm going to try and pee before sleeping." The past few nights I'd been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I kept seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway, he said. I don't know if my mum wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it, but she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost-like figure at the end of the hallway is the reason I started running up the hall. Years later, when I'm about 19, my mum and I are having a conversation in her car about a dog we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviour when my mum blurted out, "Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food we had?" This really caught my surprise because in all the years I've lived in the house, we never once called the police. I asked her what she was talking about and she looked equally surprised, as if she had just revealed something by mistake. "Oh, that's right, I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night I woke up hearing sounds outside my window, and when I looked I saw a man staring into my room." She went on to describe how turning the lights on caused him to take off running, and she grabs my dad's pistol before calling the police. I can't remember all the details I gave when they showed up. It's a tall white male wearing striped pyjamas. short hair, something like that. They said it matched up with the description of a man they're looking for in the area. It turns out he escaped on charge of murder. Now I know it sounds so obvious hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago in my mid-20s that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home. This happened about 2 nights ago, so I'm still replaying it over and over again in my head. I thought this would be a good place to share. I'm a pretty predictable person with a predictable schedule, so I'm not sure if this was a random occurrence or someone who knew my nightly routine. I'm a 35-year-old woman. My husband Rob gets up for work hours before me, so he goes to bed before I do. I usually get to bed a few hours after he does, around the same time every night. I turn off the lights and TV in the living room and take my dog to the back of the door to let her out. The door leads to a large deck outside. Off to the right of the deck is a few steps down and a small path to the gate. This gate's literally always chained and locked. Every single night before opening the door, I peek out the window next to it without disturbing the blinds and flip the deck light on. I never expected anyone to be there, and we've never had a problem with anyone trespassing or trying to break in. It's just something I do. Every night, kinda like peeking behind the shower curtain before I pee, so I know no one's in there. But if I don't check that, then there's gonna be the one time there actually is someone behind there, you know? So a few nights ago, I got ready for bed, went to the back door with my dog slowly following behind me, and peek out the window. I flipped the light, and my heart jumped in my throat when I see a skinny, dirty guy in his 30s or 40s, standing off to the side of the door facing it. I see him raise his arm up and hold a screwdriver above his head as soon as the lights went on, preparing for someone to open the door. I screamed, "Rob, get up, get the gun," as loud as I can, which startled the guy. He jumped over the rail of the deck and ran. My husband ran out of the bedroom with his gun. He calls the police and they show up within 5 minutes. They drove around trying to find the guy to no luck. The guy broke the lock on our gate to get in. He also pried open the back screen door, which we always kept locked as well. If I would have opened the door without looking first, I would probably be dead. I don't know if I caught the guy trying to break in or if he's waiting for me to open the door and kidnap me. Either way, it terrified me. This happened a little bit ago, about a month, and it was bizarre to say the very least. I'm 15 and playing some video games before passing out. I'd say it's about 11 PM when I hear the doorbell ring. Out of instinct, I begin walking downstairs, but about halfway there, the rationality in my mind comes out. Who rings at 11? I silently strode back upstairs to the hall, half expecting something bad to happen. An exact minute later it rings twice. My parents began to leave their room and give me a weird look, as though I had to respond. I shrug. Then he starts banging on the door. My mother jumps at the first bang, and my father's eyes widened, but more in confusion than fear. He decided to go downstairs, peeping through the view hole. It's my neighbour. My dad hesitantly opened the door, and I could hear my father's voice tremble slightly. "Hey, what do you need?" The next thing I hear is a full-blown scream argument from our neighbour, claiming that this is his house, we stole it from him. My father's uneasiness was quickly replaced with annoyance. as he simply shut the door without giving our neighbour the time of day. My dad stepped on the first step going up the stairwell when our neighbour first hit the door. I'm not talking with a fist, full on body slamming it. My father was stunned for a second. My neighbour charged the door again. This time we began to hear the splintering of wood. Everyone reacted at once. My father went to embrace the door with his body. My mum went to get the other two kids and I went for 911. The body slamming literally ensued for another 10 minutes while I'm on the phone with 911. It stopped. I think it's over and I'm relieved. But I am still on the phone. I go peek out the front window of my home and oh boy, was it only getting started. My neighbour literally took his Jeep Wrangler and simply directed it straight at our home. We had zero clue what he was doing until he hit the gas and we heard the squealing of tyres. Then he immediately hits the brakes. He was trying to scare us out. I was still on the phone with 911 and I stepped away from the window to confront my siblings and crack jokes and such to try and calm them. Eventually the police arrive and take him away. The next morning I left for school, still shaken from the night before. I then step in front of our house and see that there's tyre marks everywhere leading up to the door. I think he might have been mentally ill. I don't know. I'm just glad that the police arrived when they did and I never had to see him again. I called the police this morning and spoke to an officer who basically told me that as for right now, there's nothing they can really do unless the case escalates, but he did not say that I was right to call in and that they're aware that something might be happening. He also said that getting security cameras is a good idea, as well as getting my landlord to change the locks. He also said that they're going to send a patrol car down my street every once in a while to make sure no one's lurking. So this has been happening for about 1.5 years now. And tonight something happened that finally made me and my boyfriend realize that I wasn't imagining things. About 1.5 years ago, after living in my apartment for over 5 years, I all of a sudden started noticing that things would be out of place when I got home from work. Things that almost seemed out of place on purpose to mess with my OCD. Sometimes I would notice that knives were being put back into the block the wrong way, or little ornaments that I have around my house were facing the wrong way. Sometimes my clothes were hung up in the closet the wrong way. Just little things that I would feel was off, but there was no way to prove it. In all honesty, it could have been me just not thinking right while putting things back, daydreaming or whatever. Well, after a couple of months of things randomly being put out of place, and always having that creeped out feeling, things stopped going out of place, and I put it to the back of my mind and stopped being so paranoid, and move on with my life. That is, until about 2 weeks ago. For the first couple of weeks, my cat has seriously been trying to tell me something when I get home from work. Anyone with a cat will know exactly how they meow, and there's a type that's not I'm hungry or I'm annoyed you've been at work all day. It's a meow as in I'm scared, if that makes sense. I didn't really think anything of it, because cats can be jerks sometimes, so I assumed he was just bored and wanted to go and complain. The other day though, when I come back from work however, I noticed a pair of balled up socks that do not belong to me somewhere on the floor. This is really weird. My boyfriend come over the next night and I told him that he's left a pair of socks here. He looked at the socks and says they're not his. My heart sunk and so did his. We both knew that someone had been coming into the house again, and it probably wasn't my imagination now. A few days later, I come home from work and found a bag of linear store on the top of my couch. It was empty. This bag had come from inside my house. I had just bought a bathing suit from a store a couple of weeks prior, and the receipt for that's not in the bag. At first I thought my cat might have dragged it in there, but upon inspection there's no teeth marks, as well as my cat couldn't have opened my closet door and gone in there. It was on the top shelf, literally. The final and perhaps most unsettling thing that happened tonight. My boyfriend met me after work and we went out for dinner. We went back to the apartment after, and I went to unlock my door and noticed that it's already unlocked. Locking the door when I leave my house is the one thing that I'm most OCD about. I don't just double and triple check it, I quadruple check it. It's just a habit and integrated into me. Everyone who knows me knows that I do so, as I even do it to their doors. I have to check 4 times. Even my boyfriend was on red alert when he noticed that my door was unlocked. We entered my house and I was checking to see if anything was out of place. He ran to the sliding glass door and tugged it, and it opened right up. I never leave the door unlocked. He witnessed me lock it on Sunday when I closed the door because it was getting too cold. He saw me check it 4 times. I have not opened it since then. We are both convinced that someone's been in my house. Whoever has been coming in somehow has a key. The fact that they left the sliding door unlocked makes me think that maybe they're planning to come back with ill intentions. If they have a key, why would they need to unlock the sliding door, unless they don't want to be identified by security cameras in the building?
I will start off with some background information. I used to live in a university apartment complex while my parents were studying. This complex had a hill that was on top of it. It was steep enough for kids to take sleds and sled down the hill during the winter time. At the bottom of the hill, there was a small patch of woods. The forest contained a drain to prevent flooding. So back in elementary school, I was hanging out with my friend Daniel during summer break. Daniel was also 2 years older than me, and we were over at my apartment at the time playing Mario Kart. Then my mum came in and suggested that we go outside and get some fresh air. My parents were relatively lenient and allowed us to go anywhere as long as it was in the complex. Unfortunately for Daniel and I, we pushed this rule today. We went outside and went down to the woods to do some exploring. We began by looking for turtles, snakes and frogs. We couldn't find anything, so Daniel suggested to go through the flood drain and see if there was anything on the other side. The tunnel was dry since it hadn't rained in ages, so I was okay with it. I had been to the other side before, and it just led to a creek, and it was rather nice and secluded. So today, we went through the tunnel like usual, and when we came out, there was a group of 4 sketchy-looking high school boys smoking. They saw us, and being a 3rd grader, I got nervous. So I will briefly describe them to make it easier to differentiate between the 4. One boy was chubby, one skinny one was holding a speaker, and one had long hair, and looked like a stereotypical surfer. I'll call them Fat Boy, Skinny Boy, DJ, and Surfer Boy. Upon seeing us, they dropped the cigarettes and started heading over to us. Fat Boy asked, "What the hell are you guys doing back there?" I was still really nervous, so Daniel did all the talking. Daniel said we were just exploring and seeing what we could find. They all nodded, and DJ asked if we want to have a rap battle. I didn't want to, but before I could say anything, Daniel says yes and our troubles begin. DJ finds a beat on his phone while Skinny Boy and Daniel prepare to battle. This is where it begins to go wrong. At first, it's rather harmless, and Skinny Boy was a decent rapper, and Daniel was absolutely awful. Now, I forgot to mention that Daniel was quite racist, and Fat Boy was black. At some point in Daniel's verse, he decides it's a good idea to use the N-word. Upon hearing this, Fat Boy calls out, "What did you just say?" Daniel looks nervous now, and stutters that it just slipped out. I start grabbing Daniel and trying to leave through the tunnel when Skinny Boy grabs Daniel by the shirt collar and drags him closer to him. I begin to try and run away like I am a little scared wimp and get my parents' help. DJ sees me trying to leave and pushes me so hard that I fall and eat the dirt. After that, no one is forced on me and they're all just standing in a circle around Daniel. I continue running through the tunnel, out of the woods, up the hill and into my apartment. I frantically burst inside and started tearing up and telling my parents that Daniel was in trouble with the older boys. I was unable to articulate sentences because I was panicking, so it took 5 minutes for my parents to understand what I was saying. After I finished and told them what happened, my dad grabbed a baseball bat and went with me through the tunnel. 15 minutes had passed at this point. My dad and I arrived at a horror scene. The 4 boys were all gone, and Daniel was lying in a bloody mess on the ground. He was knocked unconscious by the boys, and there was a tooth lying next to him. My dad quickly called 911 and attempted to explain the situation. I had to help out because my parents are foreign and struggled to explain things at times. After he explained what had happened, he told me to go up to the apartment and wait for help to arrive and lead him to where Daniel was. We had also called Daniel's parents and let them know what happened. Luckily, we live in a relatively small town, so it took everyone around 10 minutes to arrive. I led everyone to the scene that had just occurred behind the tunnel. When we got there, the paramedics got to work on Daniel to get him awake and treated his numerous injuries. Daniel barely regained consciousness eventually, and then was led to the ambulance to be driven to the hospital with his parents. 2 police officers stayed behind my parents and I to give us a lesson about being more strict and being careful in areas you think are safe. After everyone left, my parents didn't even ground me because of the shock I had just witnessed. After this, I never talked to Daniel again since his parents were annoyed about my irresponsibility and my parents' lack of care. He also had probably moved since I've never seen him around school. If anyone gets to this point in the story, I would ask you to be responsible, and if you're a parent, be strict on your child and always know where they are. So this happened to me just this week. Tuesday night was prom night, and me and my girlfriend had a whole day planned together. Part of that day involved a hike, which ultimately was just an excuse to make out. So we met at my house, and then she and I biked a few miles down a hiking trail. When we got to the park, we locked up our bikes to the fence around the parking lot. There were no bike racks, and then walked up to the trailhead. We walked up the trail a bit, then found a log that was a bit off the trail and sat down. The park was pretty deserted. We saw one couple walking their dog on the trail, but other than that, nobody was there. There were only 3 or 4 cars in the lot, but as we were resting, we see this guy in a blue checkered shirt. For the purpose of this story, we'll call him Blue. He looked like he was in his late 30s or early 40s, was quite tall and skinny, and had a long face. He kind of looked like a stereotypical meth head from a TV show, though I didn't really get a druggy vibe from him. He walked by us on the trail. We were maybe 20 or 30 feet from the trail, and as he walked, he kept kind of glancing over at us. We were just chatting at this point, and figured he'd maybe seen us kissing and was kind of grossed out, so we dismissed it as him just feeling uncomfortable. Then a few minutes later, another man walks up the trail. We'll call him White, because he's wearing a white t-shirt. I know my name's a real original. He was a shorter man, and stockier than Blue, and looked like he was in his mid to late 30s. However, unlike Blue, his glances at us were more pronounced and noticeable. He seemed to really be inspecting us, rather than uncomfortably passing us like Blue did. At this point, she and I get a bit creeped out, but dismissed it in a similar fashion as Blue. Now, here's where things start to get creepy. A little while later, White passes again. This time, he's really taking a long look at us, turning his whole body as he walks away to stare. She and I decide it's time to start moving, so we walk up the trail a bit, hoping White will leave now that he was headed back to the lot. But as we walk up the trail, who do we pass but Blue, coming towards us. As we pass him, he makes a remark to us. "Be careful up there, I saw a couple of deer up that trail." I knew the park quite well. My dad runs there often, and I know that deer aren't all that dangerous, unless it's a stag, which he would have mentioned. So his remark begins to set off warning bells. Something's not right here. But again, I dismiss him as just an awkward person, and she and I continue walking up the trail. But after 100 feet or so, she and I both get the same bad feeling that something is seriously off here. So we turn around and back to the bikes. We try to talk about other stuff so we aren't as scared about what's going on, but as we pass a fork in the trail, we see Blue walking towards us again. He comes from behind us along the trail that begins to tow us, walking quite close behind, uncomfortably close. The whole time he's pretending to look at his phone, but I know it's just pretend. He's focused on us. She and I pretend to not notice and talk about how we wish we could have found the deer, and talk about experiences we've had with a deer. We're almost at the parking lot now, and I'm itching to get out there, when who do we see sitting on the bench at the end of the trail? White. Now the trail ended right where White was sitting, but a fork went sharply left and dumped us a bit further down the lot. So I pull my girlfriend in that direction, and we walk rather quickly to the bikes without turning around. When we get there, I notice Blue and White standing next to each other, and then Blue starts walking down towards us again. I'm rushing to undo the bike lock, and luckily Blue isn't walking too fast, so I'm able to unlock the bikes and get on. She and I rush out there without looking back, so I'm not sure what happened to Blue. We don't know what they wanted with us, whether it was an abduction attempt or just trying to scare us from a drug deal, but creepy dudes in the woods, let's not meet again. This story takes place some time ago. I was around 13 years old at the time. At the time, I was staying with my mum and older sister at my late grandfather's cabin in the middle of the woods. It was a dark night around mid-August, and we had been spending the summer up there. Now, this cabin has always had a distinct personality. My great-grandfather built it himself after he finished fighting the war during World War II. The interior is made up entirely of dark wood. The furniture still has that old pre-war Nordic and Eastern European feel to it, where my family's from. Carlian style and hand-woven carpets line up the floors, and the walls are decorated with old worn-out framed photographs of unknown but serious-looking relatives of my family from the past. The house has always had some mysteries, a little off-setting, but still a calming feel to it. Me and my sister, being curious kids, had just on the previous day looked through some old photo albums belonging to our great-grandparents that we found in the library, a decision which we both regretted. It turns out it was customary back in the day to photograph the dead, and as you can guess, the albums dated after the war were filled with photographs of dead bodies sitting and laying next to their relatives. We went through the album, and there were tons of them. From grown-ups to kids to actual babies in tiny coffins. And what made it worse were almost all the photos were taken unmistakably right in front of the cabin of the yard. We shivered and wondered if the bodies had been buried here too, but decided in that moment that we would never ask about it. I mention this photo album detail because it's relevant for understanding why I was already feeling creeped out that night. That evening, me and my sister had decided to sit in the candlelit living room and read horror books together, because why not? We were standing in an old cabin after all, and it felt atmospherically appropriate. My mum, being a night owl and an insomniac, had decided to go for a sauna and shower in the middle of the night. The cabin's wooden sauna is located in the stone basement of the cabin. Another important detail to know is that the cabin is quite in the middle of nowhere in the middle of a forest. There are a handful of neighbours who all live at least a kilometre or half a mile away. The whole community has lived there for generations, and everyone knows everyone, so as a rule, we never had a habit of locking the front doors when staying there. The only person that ever locked the front door of the cabin was me, and I always did it accidentally by slamming the door too hard so it automatically locked. So it was midnight, my mum was down in the basement, and me and my sister were feeling really creeped out. We barely ever had visitors during the day, and nobody has ever showed up unannounced during the night to this place. We decided in that moment that we were probably mistaken and feeling spooked by the stories, and that it must be the wind that was making the noise. We were in a mostly light mood, despite both of us feeling a bit creeped out, when suddenly out of nowhere we hear a faint knock on the door. We both jump up. We barely ever had visitors during the day, and no one has ever showed up unannounced during the night to this place. We decided that in the moment that we were probably mistaken and feeling spooked by the stories, and it must have been the wind that was making the noise. But no, the faint calm knocking came again, then louder, followed by even louder knocking. We realised that undeniably there had to be someone out there and that they wanted to get in. In horror, we both ran to the kitchen to grab something to defend ourselves with. I grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and I had a quick chat with my sister on whether we should go to the basement or get my mum. The knocking continues, and this time, whoever it wasn't knocking on the door anymore, but they had moved to the curtain-covered window next to the door to knock on it instead. My adrenaline kicked in, and I was feeling a little braver, so we decided to walk slowly towards the front door, and I decided to take a peek out the window. I moved the curtain slightly to the side and take a look. However, I see nothing but darkness out there. I close the curtain and turn to my sister, when suddenly, in that moment, someone tries to pull open the door aggressively. We both flinch, but thankfully I was the last person to enter the cabin that evening, and the door's locked. At this point, it's just us, two kids with kitchen knives, and some strange person trying to get into our cabin in the middle of the night, and the only thing separating us is an old wooden door. At this point, we've both had enough spooks, so my sister runs down to get my mum from the basement as I stand shaking by the door holding my big knife. I hear footsteps on the front porch, but no more knocking or attempting to open the door. My mum comes upstairs, and she seems to be in disbelief that anyone would be trying to get in at this hour. We all stay in the living room, waiting for more sounds, but an hour passes and we hear nothing, until suddenly we hear a loud, panicking knocking on the door. We all jump up at the sound, and my mum goes rapidly to the window to open the curtain and check who it was. Suddenly, upon seeing who it was, she mutters, "What the?" and she slowly opens the door. We hear her exchange a conversation with a woman whose voice is familiar. We walk over to check who it is and realise it's our aunt, my mum's sister, who lives on the other side of the country, standing in front of our porch in the middle of the night. She looks scared and panicked, and my mum apologises to her. "No, sorry, you can't stay here. I'll order you a taxi and get you somewhere safe," and closes the door. After some time, we see a taxi arrive and watch her leave in it. Our mum double checks that the door is locked and comes over to us looking worried. We asked her what happened, and she tells us that her sister had told her that there had been some dispute, and that she's now being chased by a handful of dangerous and angry men that want to kill her and are trying to track her down. She's been trying to run and hide from them for 2 days straight now. She has always lived a kind of wild life, but this was something new. The part of the story that really brought me chills is that the aunt claims that she had just arrived at our front porch that very moment when we heard the panic knocking on the door. She certainly hadn't been standing there quietly for an hour or been knocking on the windows, meaning that whoever was the person that was faintly knocking on the door about an hour before her arrival wasn't her. We have no idea who it was or what their intentions were, but I know that given the extraordinary circumstances, I would reckon that it was likely one of the men trying to track her down. I keep thinking back to that night. Whatever could have happened had that door not been locked. I worked in a forest maintenance and forest agriculture for a while. Some friends owned a big plot of land in the Rocky Mountains. A group of us, all guys aged 18 to 38 years of age, would gather together several times a year, go into the mountains for several days and clear up shrub bush, make fires and, when appropriate, cut Christmas trees. This particular time, it was early spring, and our crew of 9 was at about 9,200 feet elevation. There was a fairly significant amount of snow on the ground. We had put in a long day's work and were headed to camp, until the old guy of the crew asked if we wanted to head to the slope. This is a near treeless slope, free of any large rocks, about 100 yards wide, with tracks of big trees on either side. We would go there and, using one of the gators, tow a tube downhill in the snow. It was so much fun. We got to the slope, set up a fire pit and cracked open the whiskey and started having our fun. We all took several turns being towed. Jeff was the new guy and the youngest at 18. We were giving him the craziest ride, swinging him close to the trees to freak him out, sort of an initiation. It was about 1 AM, pitch black except for our dying fire and lightly snowing. Not the smartest or safest thing I've ever done, but the most fun. Just as we were wrapping up and on the last rides and heading back to the camp, Jeff freaked out. He was stumbling over his words and couldn't express himself very clearly. But finally, we got out of him that about 3/4 way down, he had seen a man standing a few yards into the woods. He was wearing a trapper's hat, one of those with a flipped up bill and ear flaps like in Fargo, and a plaid mackinaw. We were all a bit sceptical. I mean, we were on a big plot of private property. at elevation and in somewhat hostile weather, but we took the rifles off the gators and got our flashlights to give it a look. We didn't find anything, not even footprints. We chalked it up to inexperience, spooky environment, and of course whiskey, and headed back to the camp about 1/8 of a mile away. Jeff didn't sleep all night. He was convinced he saw someone. The next morning, we drove the gators to get to the house on the property, got in our trucks and headed into the little town nearby for breakfast. We had our breakfast and we were heading back to the property to say our goodbyes and go our separate ways. As we neared the intersection of the public dirt road and the private dirt road to the house, there were several police cars and ambulances. We stopped and talked to the police, who informed us the closest neighbours had found a body in a ditch as they were heading down the mountain. Police had followed in reverse, footprints up the hill, to the slope and then across the neighbouring property onto another perpendicular road. They asked if we knew anything, and of course we told them about the man. Sure enough, it was him. Self-inflicted gunshot, probably just minutes after we encountered him. I still don't know what he wanted, or if he was any danger to us, or if we could have helped him. Poor Jeff got his whiskey and meals paid for the next several weeks, but he still gets scuff about it to this day.